Hi, my name's Josh. I watched my stepfather slap my mother so hard she folded into herself, stitches still fresh from emergency surgery, eyes glassy from the meds. He threw papers at her like she was trash and said, "Choose how you pay, or get out." And you know what hurts most? I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I pulled out my phone and hit record. That's the moment everything changed. But the real question is, did it change enough? The recovery room looked calm in the way hospitals always do when something is already wrong. Pale fluorescent lights hummed above me, steady and indifferent. Machines breathed for my mother in soft, mechanical rhythms. The air carried that sharp antiseptic smell that clings to your clothes long after you leave. My mother lay on the narrow bed, eyes half closed, drifting somewhere between sleep and awareness. The surgery had been rushed, emergency appendicitis. No time to debate, no time to prepare. Fresh stitches curved beneath the thin blanket, rising and falling with each shallow breath. She was stable, the nurse said. That word was supposed to reassure me. It didn't. I sat in the chair closest to her bed, because that's where the youngest son always ends up. Not by assignment, by habit. I watched the monitors more than her face. As if numbers could tell me something her expression wouldn't. Nurses came and went, their voices low, their movements practiced. Everything appeared handled, controlled. And yet, something felt unsettled, like a door left unlocked. The hospital wristband hung loosely around my mother's wrist, white plastic against fragile skin. It caught my attention because it looked temporary, almost careless, as if it could slide off without anyone noticing. Her name, her date of birth, a barcode, reduced to something scannable. That was when my stepfather walked in. He didn't pause at the doorway, didn't look at my mother first. He crossed the room with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed, nodding once at the nurse as if she worked for him. The air shifted the moment he entered. Conversations quieted. Even the machines seemed louder. He spoke to the staff about paperwork, about timing, about things that could wait. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Authority sat naturally on him, like a tailored jacket. When his eyes finally moved to my mother, they lingered on her wristband, then flicked to me. I felt it then. This wasn't concern. This was timing. He pulled a folded stack of papers from his jacket and placed them on the rolling tray beside the bed. The metal rattled softly. He said he just needed her signature. Nothing complicated. Something to take care of details while she rested. He said it like a favor. I watched him lift her wrist gently, guiding her hand as if she were a child learning to write. The plastic band tapped against the tray with a small, hollow sound. He slid a pen between her fingers. She won't. Even remember this, he said, almost kindly. My mother stirred, her brow tightening as she tried to focus. Her hand shook. Not much, just enough. I looked toward the nurse station down the hall. Empty. The silence pressed in. I could have spoken. I knew that. I felt the words rise and stall somewhere behind my teeth. But I didn't move. I told myself this wasn't the moment. She had just come out of surgery. Stress wasn't good for her. Peace mattered. That was the story I always told myself. His voice dropped, firmer now, closer to her ear. The papers inched nearer. The room seemed smaller, tighter, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. I recognized the pattern then. He always waited for weakness, illness, exhaustion, moments when resistance took effort. And I had always been the one who stayed quiet, the one who thought silence kept things from getting worse. I told myself, To wait. Just a little longer. He adjusted the papers again and looked straight at me for the first time. Really looked. No anger, just certainty. That was when I understood this wasn't about signatures. It was about control. He leaned closer to the bed, and that's when I understood this wasn't a request. He leaned in, close enough for me to see the pores on his face. His breath smelled faintly of stale coffee and something sharper, like stress masked by control. His voice dropped even lower, calm and decisive, like a man stating facts rather than asking favors. She'll sign. It's just a formality. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking past her, over her, through her. That's when I knew. This wasn't about getting her consent. It was about getting me to move. And I didn't. I didn't budge. But I didn't speak either. He exhaled through his nose, straightened up like he'd been inconvenienced, and said it loud enough for the hallway to catch every syllable. Choose how you pay, or get out. The words hit the walls and bounced back harder. I felt the echo in my chest before I even processed what he meant. The sentence didn't belong in a hospital room. It belonged in a courtroom or a bad movie. But here, it rang out like a threat dressed in business casual. My mother twitched slightly, her eyelids fluttering as if the volume had roused something underneath her sedation. She didn't open her eyes, but her body heard him. Her fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. I looked toward the doorway. No one stood there. No nurse peeked in. No one asked if everything was okay. The beeping machines continued their indifferent rhythm, completely at odds with the sudden stillness in the room. And him? He stood there like he'd just announced policy, like this was normal. What he meant by pay didn't need explanation. I knew. I've known for years. Pay meant shut your mouth. Pay meant smile when it burns. It meant keep the peace while they chip away at whatever part of you still believes in fairness. He didn't mean money, although that too would come later. He meant power, obedience, quiet compliance. This wasn't a man losing control. This was control. Then, without breaking his posture, he stepped closer and grabbed the curtain. With one hand, he pulled it halfway shut, not enough to hide us completely, just enough to make a statement. This isn't your business, but I'm not hiding either. That half-closed curtain sliced the room in half like a border. Public on one side, private war on the other. You need to step back, he said, not looking at me. I didn't. I just stood there, hands loose at my sides, blood rushing to places I didn't know were tight. Step. Back. Still, I didn't move. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He turned back toward my mother and reached for her hand again. Her skin looked paper thin, flushed from meds and exhaustion. The hospital wristband lay just above her wrist bone, still loose, still unread by any scanner. Just a plastic loop now, one that should have meant protection. But here, it looked more like a tag. He slipped the pen into her fingers again. She tried. I saw it. The flicker of a twitch in her hand. The instinct to follow direction. But her grip was gone. The pen fell, rolled off the tray, and clattered softly to the floor. He froze. So did I. For a split second, there was only the sound of the machines and the breath between us. That pen, tiny, stupid, blue, lay on the tile like a verdict. His hand stayed in the air, fingers twitching like he was adjusting to something unexpected. Then his jaw clenched. His body turned, not fast, not explosive, just tight and shifting with pressure he hadn't expected to need. I knew that shift. I'd seen it before. That moment right before the punchline of a punishment. Not always physical, but always sharp. My chest tightened, my teeth pressed together. I told myself to speak. Say something. Say anything. But the room, the curtain, the smell, the fluorescent buzz, they all screamed to stay still. Like before, like always. Because silence keeps peace, right? Only it didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like surrender. Then he moved. His hand snapped forward, quicker than I expected for a man his age. There was no warning, no wind-up, just contact. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to change everything. The slap didn't echo. It didn't need to. It was the kind of sound that went inward, flat, measured. A thud against skin that carried no apology, no hesitation, just intent. Her head turned with the force of it, not violently, but enough for her cheek to hit the bed rail. There was a metallic rattle. Then silence. For a second, the heart monitor skipped, then sped up, as if even the machines had noticed something had shifted. My mother didn't cry out. She didn't scream. But her body folded slightly inward, like a string had been cut inside her. Her eyelids fluttered, and her lips moved without forming words. He stepped back like nothing happened. I stood there, blinking, trying to decide if I'd actually seen it. My legs didn't move, but my fingers curled into fists without me realizing it. My jaw clenched. The room felt smaller again. The air tighter, hotter. She didn't move to protect herself. She couldn't. On her face, just under the eye, a red mark was already forming. No blood, no swelling, just a clean, raw outline of his hand. An imprint that shouldn't be there. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out slowly through my nose, trying to stay in control. His expression didn't change. In fact, he looked calmer than before. He had done what he came to do. That's what it felt like. I looked at the call button hanging by the side of her bed, just a few inches from her fingers. It might as well have been miles away. Her arm twitched, then fell back. She didn't try again. And him? He just muttered, "Always so dramatic," and gave a small shrug, like slapping a woman post-surgery was no worse than brushing lint off his jacket. The curtain still hung half-closed, as if trying to pretend we weren't here. Then I saw it again. Her wrist. Her hand had twisted with the impact, and now the plastic wristband caught the overhead light. That tiny band meant to identify, to protect, now just a loop of helplessness. Her fingers curled weakly inward toward her palm. It was the same hand he struck past. She looked like a patient. He looked like an accuser. And I just stood there. That's when it clicked. This wasn't new. There'd been other moments, raised voices from behind closed doors, arguments that always ended with her agreeing to something she hadn't wanted, paperwork shoved across the dinner table. I'd seen it growing up, but I hadn't seen this, because it was never directed at me. Back then, I told myself it was about their marriage, not my business, not my place. But now I was in it. And this wasn't some moment of lost temper. This was a pattern, a method. He used silence like a weapon, and I'd helped him use it again and again, just by not getting in the way. My fists were still clenched. My shoulder twitched like it wanted to launch forward. But I didn't. I didn't because somewhere in that moment, something broke. But it wasn't just rage. It was clarity. I realized if I reacted now, if I hit him or shouted or shoved, I'd be the one escorted out. Security would see a family dispute, and his calm tone would win again. The hospital would apologize, maybe even to him, and she'd still be in that bed, alone. So I didn't lunge. I didn't scream. I stepped around the bed, knelt beside her, and gently lifted her upright. She whimpered softly, confused, dazed. I adjusted her pillow with one hand and reached into my pocket with the other. My phone was already there, unlocked from earlier when I checked the time. I held it close to my side, angling the camera just slightly. I didn't speak. I didn't look at him. I just pressed record. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Because for the first time, my silence wasn't submission. It was the beginning of something else. He thought the worst thing had already happened, but that was before I decided to stay silent on purpose. The space between us thickened. I didn't speak. I didn't even shift my weight. Still crouched next to my mother, my phone still recording, I kept my eyes on her closed lids, the slight twitch in her jaw, the quiet rise and fall of her chest. He stood there, maybe 3 steps away, but he might as well have been miles. He thought the worst thing had already happened, but that was before I decided to stay silent on purpose. Now the silence wasn't fear, it was focus. No apology came, no outburst, just the rhythmic beep of the machines finding their calm again. That was the only thing that acknowledged something had happened at all. He reached up, ran his palm slowly down the front of his suit jacket, smoothing it as if straightening the moment back into place, as if adjusting fabric could erase what he'd done. My mother's wrist, still bearing the hospital band, rested limp against the blanket. It hadn't moved. The same band that marked her identity in this place. Now just a tag on a body someone thought they could use. He expected me to yell, expected I'd finally crack, throw a punch, cause a scene. That would have made it easier for him. But I didn't. Instead, I adjusted her pillow again, gently pulled the blanket a little higher over her shoulder. He didn't like that. "You gonna just sit there?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. What kind of man just kneels like a dog while his mother gets dragged through this? I looked at her face, not him. "You hear me?" he added, louder this time, testing. I reached for the water cup and placed it within her reach, though I knew she wouldn't use it yet. He exhaled through his nose. I could feel the shift in his posture before I even glanced his way. He needed something from me. Not physically, emotionally. He needed me to crack. "You know what I think?" he continued. "I think you've always been soft, hiding behind that bookish silence. You were never going to be the kind of man who takes charge. That's why she married me." Still, I didn't look at him. He hated that. "That video won't save her," he said suddenly, almost too casually. My fingers didn't flinch, but inside, my spine straightened. He moved in closer, voice lower, eyes cold. "You think I don't see what you're doing? Go ahead, record all you want. Hospitals like this, they don't burn down their own donors." My jaw clenched. "They know who supports them," he added, "who keeps the wheels greased. Nobody's going to come running because you pressed record on a private family moment." Private. That word hit different when someone's face still held the trace of a handprint. For a second, I remembered being a kid, hearing that same word used after a slammed door, after muffled crying down the hallway. "It's private," my mother had told me once, standing in the kitchen with red-rimmed eyes. "Don't worry about it." But now, in this moment, it wasn't private anymore. This time, I was here. This time, I saw it. And this time, I wasn't going to let silence belong to him. He waited for me to react, to shout, to swing, something, anything. But I had already made a decision. I saw his need for control more clearly than ever. His power didn't live in his hands. It lived in getting people to perform for him, to lose composure. to act out, to turn themselves into the problem. So I stayed still, and it rattled him. "I'm warning you," he said, leaning in so close I could smell the faint aftershave clinging to his collar. "You think you're making a stand, but you're not. You're just making it harder on her." That's when I realized he needed me to believe silence protected her, that backing down was mercy, that walking away was strength. It used to be. I used to believe that. But now, silence wasn't for him anymore. It was mine. I wasn't frozen. I was listening, watching, planning. His hands were empty now. His words, too. All he had left was the kind of threat that comes right before a man realizes he's running out of moves. At the edge of the curtain, I noticed movement. A nurse. She had paused, mid-step. Maybe she'd heard something. Maybe she'd just seen the wrong expression on the wrong face. She didn't come in, but she didn't walk away either. Good. I wanted someone to witness this without my voice needing to fill the space. He must have seen her too. He straightened up, adjusted his jacket again. The performance resumed. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten out loud. He leaned down one last time, just close enough so only I could hear, and whispered, "This is your last chance to let it go." And I knew then I wouldn't. He left without another word. No door slam, no backward glance, just the slow, smug exit of a man who believed he'd won something. I didn't move for a long time after that. The silence he left behind wasn't relief. It was a hum of something heavier, like smoke after a fire. Not dangerous anymore, but choking all the same. My legs ached from how long I'd been crouched. I finally eased into the chair beside the bed, close to my mother, listening to the steady rhythm of the machines. That mechanical breathing, steady and indifferent, had become my only source of reassurance. I looked at her face, still, pale, fragile, in a way that seemed impossible for someone I'd once seen carry groceries in one arm and me in the other. The faint red mark on her cheek had softened into a shadow, but I couldn't unsee it. A nurse entered quietly, middle-aged, clipboard in hand. She checked the IV and the oxygen levels with a practiced rhythm. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. "She's stable for now." I nodded. Her blood pressure spiked earlier. She paused but didn't meet my eyes. That can happen. Post-op stress. I could tell she was choosing her words carefully, skirting the edge of involvement without stepping over it. "She was struck," I said, keeping my voice even. "I have it on video." There was a silence between us. Not denial, not disbelief, just distance. "Do you want me to call a doctor?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Not yet." She adjusted a setting on the monitor, then walked out without another word. I exhaled slowly. Even in a place meant for healing, the truth had to be smuggled in quietly. Institutions know how to stay out of family business. I sat back down. Minutes passed. Then a new nurse entered. Not younger. Older, in fact. Gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her steps deliberate. Calm. She didn't glance around nervously like the others had. She came straight to my mother's side. She checked the monitors, then gently lifted my mother's wrist. The wristband slid slightly, catching the overhead light. Her eyes lingered there, then flicked to me. "I saw everything," she said. Just that. 4 words, no drama, no pity, just confirmation. She didn't reach for my phone, didn't ask me what I planned to do. She didn't need to. "You might want to speak to someone from patient advocacy," she added after a pause, "or the charge nurse. Your choice." For the first time in hours, I felt something stir in my chest that wasn't anger. hope. She turned back to the wristband, checked the timestamp from the anesthesia logs, then quietly scribbled something on a notepad. When she finished, she looked back at me and nodded once before stepping out. The door clicked shut behind her. The band on my mother's wrist had been there the whole time, flimsy plastic, printed with numbers and barcodes. Earlier, it had felt like a shackle. Now it looked more like evidence. I looked at the phone in my hand again. Still recording. When the door opened again, it wasn't a nurse. It was her. The older nurse had kept her word. Or maybe she hadn't said anything at all. Maybe things just had a way of moving when the truth started to show. She wore a badge that read Case Supervisor, carried a clipboard, and looked me in the eye the moment she entered. "I understand there's been a concern raised," she said. I hesitated. This was the moment, the point where silence used to win, where I'd been taught to let things slide for the sake of peace. But I wasn't looking for peace anymore. I was looking for justice. "Yes," I said, "there's video." She sat down across from me, not rushed. She didn't ask to see it right away. Instead, she studied my mother. Her hand still rested on the blanket, fingers slightly curled under, the band loosely hanging from her wrist. "We'll need to talk," the supervisor said. "But first, let me ask you something." She leaned forward, voice low, steady. "Do you want to pursue a formal report?" The question hit harder than I expected, because with it came a flood of consequences. Family anger, legal backlash, uncomfortable conversations, maybe even being accused of betrayal by the very people I'd spent years protecting. I looked at my mother again. Her face softened in sleep, her breath slow and even. I thought of all the times I'd stayed quiet, all the little moments I told myself weren't bad enough. The slammed doors, the veiled threats, the emotional bruises that never showed up on skin. And then I thought of that sound, the slap that had cracked something open, not just in her, but in me. The answer was already there. The answer had already settled in me, steady and unavoidable. I nodded once, more to myself than to her, and followed the supervisor out of the recovery room. We walked only a short distance, past a glass partition, and into a small administrative office tucked beside the nurses' station. The hum of machines faded, replaced by the quieter buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft click of a door closing behind us. She introduced herself again, slower this time, as if resetting the tone. Her voice stayed even, practiced, the kind that didn't rush or soften the truth. "I need to ask you one thing first," she said, resting her clipboard on the desk. "Was your mother cleared to sign any legal or financial documents tonight?" The question landed with more weight than any threat he'd made earlier. I looked back through the glass window toward my mother's bed. She shifted slightly, her brow tightening for a moment before smoothing again. The sedation still held her in that in-between state, awake enough to breathe on her own, nowhere near aware enough to consent to anything. "No," I said, "she wasn't." The supervisor nodded once, not surprised, not relieved, just confirming something she already suspected. "All right," she said, "then we proceed." She asked for times first. When my mother had been admitted, when the surgery ended, when he arrived. I answered carefully, reconstructing the evening piece by piece. Names came next. The surgeon. 2 nurses I could describe but not fully identify. My stepfather. Myself. She wrote everything down without interrupting. When I mentioned the recording on my phone, she paused, looked up briefly, then continued writing. She didn't ask to hear it yet. That restraint told me more than any reassurance could have. "Do you know what those papers were?" she asked. I assumed something financial, I said. He didn't explain. She opened a thin folder and slid a few photocopied pages toward me. I recognized the layout immediately. Dense paragraphs, signature lines at the bottom. My mother's name typed neatly near the edge. "These are financial authorization forms," she said. "Power of attorney extensions, asset access, nothing medical." My stomach tightened, not from panic, but from clarity. "They were invalid the moment he tried to use them," she continued. "A patient under anesthesia cannot consent, especially not without a witness and physician clearance." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So none of it stands?" I asked. "None of it," she said. "And the attempt itself is a serious concern." In that moment, something shifted. Not in the room. In me. I'd spent so much energy bracing for confrontation, for raised voices and force. I hadn't considered this quieter kind of power. The kind that lived in forms, timestamps, and written policies. The kind that didn't care how confident a man sounded when he walked into a room. "This will be documented," she went on. "The incident, the attempted signatures, the physical altercation reported by staff." "Security?" I asked. "If you feel unsafe," she said carefully. "Yes." I thought of his voice, the warning, the way he'd spoken as if systems bent naturally in his favor. "I do," I said. She nodded and reached for the phone on her desk. Before she could dial, the door opened behind us. He stepped in like he belonged there. Same suit, same posture. But something was off. The smile he wore didn't quite reach his eyes this time. His gaze flicked from the supervisor to the folder on the desk, then to me. "Well," he said lightly, "this feels unnecessary." No one invited him to sit. The supervisor stood, placing herself between him and the desk. "Sir, this is a private administrative review." "I'm her husband," he replied, "and this is a family matter." She didn't raise her voice. "Not anymore." His eyes hardened. He glanced again at the paperwork, then back at me. For the first time, there was calculation there. Not dominance, not certainty. Something closer to concern. I met his gaze without speaking. He looked at the forms again, at the notes in the margins, at the clock on the wall ticking steadily above us. The room felt smaller, tighter, but not in the way it had earlier. This time, the pressure wasn't on me. He straightened his shoulders. "We can discuss this later," he said. "At home." "No," the supervisor replied. "We'll be discussing it here." Silence stretched between them, and in that silence, I saw it land on him. The realization that this wasn't something he could smooth over with a lowered voice or a well-timed threat. That this wasn't just family business anymore. The realization didn't fade from his face when the silence stretched. It hardened. He stepped fully into the office as if momentum alone could reassert ownership, closing the door with a careful, deliberate motion that sounded louder than it should have. The hallway noise dulled, leaving us in a tight pocket of air that felt suddenly contested. He smiled, the kind of smile meant to reassure people who wanted reassurance. It never reached his eyes. "Let's slow this down," he said, turning slightly toward the supervisor. He addressed her by her title, crisp and respectful, as if they were colleagues meeting for the first time. "There's been a lot of emotion tonight, understandably." I recognized the shift immediately. Charm before pressure, calm before blame. He gestured vaguely in my direction without looking at me. "My stepson has always been sensitive. He takes things personally. It's been an issue for years." The words were measured, chosen to sound concerned rather than cruel. He talked about my job in passing, how I'd struggled to settle, how I'd been quiet to a fault in family matters. He framed my silence as instability, my restraint as proof that I wasn't reliable now. "He's overwhelmed," he said. "Anyone would be, given the circumstances. But exaggeration doesn't help anyone recover." I felt heat rise in my chest, sharp and immediate. Not surprise, recognition. This was the counterattack. If he couldn't control the situation, he'd control the narrative. The supervisor didn't interrupt. She listened, pen moving steadily across the page. When he began to raise his voice just a notch, she lifted her hand. "Sir," she said evenly, "this is a medical facility. Please lower your volume." The request landed cleanly. Not an argument. A boundary. He paused, lips tightening, then nodded as if agreeing with her point. But when he turned toward me, the politeness drained away. "You think this ends here?" he asked quietly. "You walk out of this building feeling brave. And then what? Lawyers get involved. Money gets spent. Families pick sides. Your mother pays the price long after tonight is forgotten." He took a step closer, just enough to remind me of the corridor outside, the world beyond hospital walls where influence mattered more than rules. "You don't want that kind of trouble," he said. "You never have." Fear flickered, quick and honest, not of him standing there, but of the future he was sketching. The long reach of retaliation, the quiet consequences. And then something settled. This threat wasn't a deterrent, it was confirmation. If I backed down now, there would always be another room, another moment of weakness he'd exploit. The pattern would continue, just quieter. "I'm done," I said. Not loud, not angry, just final. The supervisor shifted her stance, angling herself slightly toward the doorway. As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared at the end of the hall, visible through the glass. They didn't rush. They didn't posture. They simply stood there, present. For a fraction of a second, his gaze flicked past me toward the recovery wing. My mother's wristband caught the light as she stirred, the white band stark against her skin. He looked at it like it was leverage, and then realized it wasn't. The supervisor straightened the folder on her desk. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to need you to step outside while we contact the police." He laughed once, short and dismissive, as if expecting agreement. But the sound died quickly when he noticed the room hadn't shifted with him. No one else was laughing. His laugh fell flat, like a joke that no one found funny. And in that silence, something shifted, not in our favor or his, but in the balance of power that had long tilted his way. The supervisor didn't even blink. She stood still behind her desk, one hand lightly resting near the folder that now held copies of the forged documents, her expression calm and unreadable. The 2 security officers positioned themselves near the door, not aggressive, just present, but it was enough. His eyes tracked their placement, his lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't speak again, not right away. He just stood there, trying to figure out if there was any version of this moment he could still control. The room held its breath. I could hear my pulse, louder than it should have been, echoing in my ears. I wasn't afraid, not exactly, but something like it still tightened in my chest. A tension I couldn't shake, like I was waiting for the next punch, even though the fight had moved beyond fists. Seconds stretched. I felt the kind of unease that didn't come from doubt, but from knowing that even when the tide turns, the undertow can still drag you under. And then, the footsteps. Not hurried, not panicked, measured, confident. The rhythm of trained boots on hospital tile, echoing down the hallway just outside the administrative wing. I didn't need to see them yet. I knew. It was law enforcement. The kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. It simply owned it. He heard it too. His shoulders lifted just slightly. One breath. One last calculation. But no way out. Two uniformed officers stepped into view. A man and a woman, mid-40s maybe. No urgency in their movements, but their eyes scanned the room with practiced awareness. They took it all in. The tension, the supervisor's posture, his proximity to me, the silent security guard still at attention. The female officer spoke first. "We received a call from administration regarding a potential case of patient coercion involving legal documentation." The supervisor nodded and motioned toward the folder on her desk. "Yes, officers. We have a situation involving unauthorized financial documents signed while the patient was under sedation. The son," she looked at me, "raised concerns earlier. I've reviewed the records, including timestamps and witness notes." The male officer stepped forward slightly. "Has there been any physical altercation?" The supervisor didn't hesitate. "Yes, earlier this evening. There's video footage. The incident occurred in the recovery wing." They turned to me. "Do you want to make a formal statement at this time?" the female officer asked. I nodded. Just once, and I said, "He didn't come to visit her. He came to take something." That was all. No speech, no performance. Just the truth, clean and sharp. The officer moved toward the folder, flipping to the photocopied page I'd watched the supervisor handle earlier. She read something quietly to herself, then looked at the wristband timestamp in the report. "Sedation confirmed at 5:42 p.m., she said, glancing toward the other officer. "Document signed at 5:51. She turned to him. "That document isn't valid." He tried to speak. Of course he did. "This is all being blown out of proportion," he said, taking one step forward. "I was just following her wishes. There's no crime in that." But the words felt weak in the air. Everyone in the room knew better. Even him. The officer raised a hand, not to silence him, but to draw a line. "We'll need you to come with us while we begin our investigation." "Are you kidding me?" he snapped. "I'm her husband. This is a family matter." "No, sir," the officer replied calmly. "This is a criminal matter now." His face tightened. He turned to me, and for a second I saw the version of him that had always hovered just beneath the surface, the one who'd gotten away with too much for too long. "You're going to regret this," he said, voice low. "You think this is justice? Wait until the lawyers get involved. You think you're protected?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The soft metallic sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists was answer enough. Not loud, not dramatic, but it echoed through the space like a final punctuation mark. He didn't resist. He just stood there as they secured him, turned him slightly, and began walking him out of the room. One of the security guards followed at a respectful distance. As he passed through the doorway, he glanced back, but this time, no one met his eyes. Not even me. The hallway didn't erupt. No one clapped. Life didn't pause to celebrate. Nurses moved quietly past, a cart wheeled by, monitors beeped as they had before. But something had shifted. The silence he used to dominate now worked against him. The same quiet he once relied on to suppress doubt had exposed him. That silence had never protected us because it was noble. It protected him because we allowed it. Not anymore. I stood there a moment longer, just breathing. Then I turned and walked slowly back down the corridor toward my mother's room. The soft soles of my shoes brushed against the tile, no longer avoiding noise. As I reached her door and pushed it open, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, just release. She was still asleep, her body calm, breathing steady. The wristband, still wrapped gently around her arm, was no longer a symbol of helplessness. It was proof of everything. And yet, as I stood beside her and looked at her face, I realized something else. Justice had come, but healing hadn't even begun. I thought that was the end, but walking back into my mother's room showed me what justice still couldn't fix. I stepped back into the recovery room alone. The hallway lights faded behind me, replaced by the soft hum of medical monitors and the dim, gentle glow of the bedside lamp. Night had deepened while everything unfolded outside these walls, but in here, time felt suspended. My mother was still asleep, truly asleep this time, not fogged by chemicals she never consented to. Her breathing was steady, the rise and fall of her chest quiet but sure. Her face looked softer than earlier, though the redness along her cheekbone had not entirely faded. It was over, but not really. The chaos, the confrontation, the arrest, they'd shifted the story, yes, but they hadn't erased anything. The damage wasn't undone. It simply stopped growing. I pulled the chair closer to her bed and sat down slowly, feeling each joint in my back and legs complain. My body had held tension for so many hours, maybe even days without me noticing. Now it all came crashing down in dull aches. There were no words. None that felt right anyway. She didn't need promises. She didn't need speeches. So I just sat with her. The silence between us had always been heavy, but now it felt different. Not a wall, but a pause. A space for breath. And for once, I let myself sit inside it without trying to fix or fill it. My eyes landed on her wrist again. That hospital band. Crinkled now. Smudged. One edge curled just slightly where she must have brushed it in her sleep. Hours ago, I'd looked at that wristband and seen helplessness. Proof that she was vulnerable. That she was, in his eyes, manageable. Now? I saw survival. It had become evidence. Not just in court or in an official report, but in my own heart. She had lived through something that should never have happened. And somehow, so had I. That plastic loop didn't represent control anymore. It represented endurance. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to pride. Not in what we had been through, but in the fact that we were still here. Still breathing. Still together. I leaned back slightly, eyes burning, but I didn't cry. Not then. The grief would come, sure. But right now, I was just trying to hold steady. I thought of all the moments I hadn't spoken up. Not just tonight. Not just this month. Years. Decades even. I thought of birthdays where tension ruined the cake before the first candle was lit. Holidays where smiles were forced like decorations pulled from dusty boxes. I had told myself I was keeping the peace. I had told myself it wasn't my place. But silence. Silence wasn't neutral. It was a decision. One I made over and over, even when it didn't feel like a choice. And now, sitting here in this sterile hospital room with my mother finally safe, I realized something that cut deeper than I expected. My silence had cost us more than his violence ever did. I didn't hate myself for it, but I didn't forgive it either. Not completely. That's the complicated truth no one wants to say out loud. That you can understand why you stayed quiet and still wish you hadn't. I rubbed my face with both hands, letting the roughness of my palms ground me. There were going to be depositions, paperwork, Courtrooms that smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. Family phone calls filled with judgment and second guessing. Some people wouldn't believe me. Some would pretend they hadn't seen what they saw. Others would try to stay neutral. I already knew who they were. I could hear their voices in my head. This could have been handled privately. Are you sure you're remembering it right? You're tearing the family apart. But the truth was, he'd done that a long time ago. I just finally stopped helping him hold it together, and not everyone would understand. That was part of it too. I didn't need them to. What I needed was to keep showing up, keep telling the truth, even when my voice trembled, keep standing beside my mother, even if everything else fell apart. Strength wasn't the shouting. It wasn't standing up in one dramatic moment. It was staying. It was walking back into that room after everything exploded and choosing not to run from what was left. It was sitting in the dark, not knowing what tomorrow held, and deciding I'd face it anyway. I looked at my mother again. Her hand twitched in her sleep, fingers curling slightly. I reached for them, held them gently. I didn't say it out loud, but I meant every word of it. I'm here now, and I am not going anywhere. For the first time in my life, I didn't need peace if it came at the price of truth. I didn't need harmony built on lies. And I knew there were others like me, others who waited too long, who bit their tongues so hard they still tasted blood years later, who told themselves, not yet, one too many times, if you're one of them, I see you. And I don't blame you. You did what you had to survive. But if you're still waiting for someone to give you permission to speak, this is it. This is yours. I didn't promise my mother that everything would be okay. That would have been dishonest. But I did promise this. She wouldn't face it alone again. And for both of us, that was the beginning of something. Justice showed up that night, but healing, I learned, takes longer and starts with no longer staying silent.